Ok, so yo voy a hacer un live si no les molesta. ¿A alguien le molesta? Déjame. Oh, let me talk in English too. Sorry. I'm gonna do a Facebook live. If somebody objects, that's fine. I just wanted to show around the room, and then I'll return it to looking at me. And this is gonna be a little awkward because I'm gonna be moving back and forth, but you're gonna get to see me every so often, and I hope that the mic is strong enough so that people at home can listen to what I'm saying. Hi, everybody. I think it has some sort of a ring that rings. I'm concerned that this is not gonna be. Should I put it somewhere in here? No, that's not gonna work. Because it's not gonna, I mean, since I wanna move around, I don't know maybe the best is putting it up there. Oops.
No se preocupe.
Está
¿Aquí?
metido el live.
Aquí.
Vamos a ver, moverlo para acá. Así, como que medio así. Para que se vea más. I'm going to be walking around. The problem is that they're probably not going to be able to hear everything that I say. Hear me? I hope you do.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, I think it's time, right? So, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. It is an honor for me to be able to spend some time and explain some things and share with you my thoughts and get to be known and get to know you. As you may have seen from the title of the presentation, this presentation is going to consist of two parts. The first part, I'm going to talk about Promesa. And the second part, I'm going to talk about the Constitutional Assembly. I'm going to try to describe both topics as good as I know, as much as I know about them, so that you guys can get the information. And I would very much welcome from you if you have any questions at any point. I am a professor. And I like my classes to be interactive. I don't like to, make it be just like me talking up front. So you can leave it there. You don't have to. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's start. Ladies and gentlemen, friends interested in Puerto Rican matters. Let's start and let's talk about promesa. The first part. When someone gets a promise, it's usually a reason for hope, right? But in 2016, Puerto Rico got a promise in the form of a law. The law is 48 U.S.C. Chapter 20, Puerto Rico Oversight, Management, and Economic Stability, or PROMESA. This promise from the United States government gave Puerto Rico nothing to be hopeful about. PROMESA created the fiscal board to administer Puerto Rico's budget. For all intents and purposes. La Junta governs Puerto Rico, not our publicly elected officials. The territorial clause gives Congress administrative authority over Puerto Rico. This has been ratified by the Supreme Court. However, democracy in the United States requires the consent of those who are governed. Promesa then is in violation of US Constitution, law, and treaties, which are part of the supreme law of the country. It is part of what has been recognized as benevolent colonialism, but is still colonialism. But let's look first at what brought us to this moment. Let's look at the historical, economic background that has, happened in Puerto Rico in the past 100 years. In 1898, Puerto Rico was passed on to the United States by the government of Spain. Having been a colony of Spain since the 1500s, Puerto Rico found itself suddenly under the rule of the United States government. In terms of economy, historians seem to agree that criollos mainly depended on subsistence agriculture, and some agricultural companies were hoping to introduce their coffee and their sugar into the U.S. markets. I'm sorry that you have to. Okay. Thank you so much. So moving on from 1898 to 1917. In 1917, Puerto Ricans got the U.S. citizenship. In 1920, the Jones Act had the effect of closing Puerto Rican ports to ships other than the United States. So as a result, up till now, only United States ship can get into Puerto Rican maritime ports. In 1952, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico was established. And by this time, in terms of economy, subsistence agriculture had been slowly but surely replaced by monocultures belonging mostly to United States firms. Operación Manos a la Obra, or Operation Bootstrap as it's called in English, is then created to industrialize Puerto Rican economy. The human costs in each of these stages is not accounted for. Every major shift in Puerto Rican economy resulted in what they call a labor surplus. In human terms, that's people who don't have jobs, and then they have to out-migrate to the United States and other places. In 1976, as a result of the oil crisis, Section 936 was created, and it gave tax exemptions to United States pharmaceutical industries. There was no accountability or measures to create synergies that resulted in initiatives that would benefit Puerto Rico in the long run. So again, no sustainability of the economic measures taken in Puerto Rico. Then that came to a halt in 1996 because Section 936 was eliminated. And then this started an undeniable downturn of Puerto Rico's economy. There was a 10-year phase-out period, but the government's operations quickly became financially untenable. Even though since the 1970s, the government had been accumulating debt to pay for government operations. The governing classes, one after the other, shortchanged Puerto Rico as they kept issuing debt over debt. So they were basically, if we put it in layman's terms, if I have a mortgage, I take a loan, or I take from my credit card to pay for the mortgage. That doesn't make any sense, right? So that's what the government was doing. In reality, it was a way to survive from election to election. With that history of unsustainable economic models, one after the other, and the resulting accumulation of debt, we arrived to 2015. Governor Alejandro Garcia Padilla publicly acknowledges then that the debt is unpayable, that Puerto Rico's inability to pay the debt and our credit crashes. Puerto Rico has $72 billion in general debt and COFINA bonds, and $49 billion in retirement funds. In response, the United States Congress passed Promesa in 2016. Promesa effectively, as I said, creates a layer over our elected government, the board, or La Junta. And talking about La Junta specifically, La Junta consists of 7 members, 7 officials who are named by Congress and the President, and has no constituent representative with the vote. The United States Courts of Appeals have already found that La Junta members are officers of the United States, and we are pending decision from the Supreme Court to determine the validity of the members or La Junta's decisions. All of the members in La Junta have neoliberal views. That means that they don't have any focus or any interest on economic development. So we don't have the diversity in La Junta in terms of views in terms of how to proceed with the economy. One another thing, La Junta's operations are paid for with Puerto Rican monies, Puerto Rico funds. In 2019, that meant $64 million. Can you imagine $2 million only in trips? So, can Puerto Rico afford this? La Junta is endowed with powers that override those of the legislative and the executive, and has the capacity to stop the enactment of laws, to call for a hire freeze, to forbid strikes. La Junta has stated that they have to be, quote unquote, consulted during the formulation and prior to the announcements of policies. La Junta has seemingly had very poor execution, as it has entered agreements that will arguably drive us to a second bankruptcy. But in the end, how does this translate to the lives of Puerto Ricans? Promesa is not viable, and La Junta fails to acknowledge that whatever measures they take, austerity measures, make it more complex for Puerto Ricans on their day-to-day lives to survive. We have one of the highest sales taxes in the nation, 11.5%. And part of that is going to be used for the next 40 years to pay for the debt instead of essential services. We have a crumbling infrastructure. We have unreliable energy grid and expensive energy. We have unstoppable outmigration. We have government inefficiencies and services. We have poor education system. We have a loss of livelihood, jobs, homes, cars, health, and I haven't even talked about Maria. The sheer destruction that only served to bring to light the reality of our crumbling infrastructure. And now the earthquakes in the south. 2 days after the earthquakes, I was in Guanica, and there were a lot of elder viejitos without a place to sleep. So how are we to rebuild the house? That's what we ask. And we are seeking for the debt to be audited. We want the cancellation of illegal debt. We want economic development measures. We would like for our ports to be freed up, and we would like for Puerto Rico to embrace innovation and diversify its economy. About the board's work, I see. I have. Oh, go ahead.
You talked about the Define Puerto Rico economy. What are some of the ideas you have about which sector should Puerto Rico be investing in, and then if you get a,
when I get elected. Let's talk about that.
But what are the kind of initiatives that you think Congress can support that would help diversify the economy in the way that
I have my own personal bias because I am in technology, and I feel like Puerto Rico has the ability and the capacity to become the next Bali, the Caribbean Bali. That's one of the things. I also believe that there's a lot to be learned and to be promoted and supported in the form of agriculture, ecotourism, small and medium businesses, local businesses, that is. I have been part of what they call the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Puerto Rico because I founded a company, and I have seen the creativity, the innovation that Puerto Ricans are engaging in as part of that growth that, we're pushing against everything, but still we survive and we thrive.
And how can Congress help that then? Because you talked about Promesa not being helpful toward macroeconomic development. What are the kinds of things you think Congress can do to help with that?
Ideally, I have thought about Congress passing a Marshall Plan for Puerto Rico. So, does that answer my question? Okay. About the board's work.
It is a great discussion.
Yeah.
It's a great discussion from the standpoint of economics. And I think that's where your question is kind of.
Yeah.
I spent the last 6 years in Puerto Rico. I was the federal police monitor for reform of
Oh.
Puerto Rico.
That would keep you busy.
Exactly, and you have brought probably the centerpiece of what it is, because there's so much money being invested in Puerto Rico right after Maria and right now after the earthquake from the federal government through FEMA and stuff like that. But, you know, that money is really the big question mark. How it's being used, and more importantly, who is being used to and where pockets are going to. And it's definitely is not going to the second layer of the society, which is so much needed. One piece that, if I may, one piece is Puerto Rico still, there's over 300 residential caseríos. 33% of the population still lives there. So what you're going to find is a lot of people who still don't have the proper education. You will find single mothers. You'll find infested drugs areas and stuff like that. And there has to be a change in how you think economically to impact at least to that area. So I appreciate the question.
Not only that, but I think it is extremely important in order for us to rebuild our credibility in Congress and with the United States and with the world and among us ourselves, to have more and more transparency. One of the ways that I think that we can accomplish that is by embracing more an organized and very well planned effort to digitize Puerto Rican government transactions.
Yeah, everything's on paper. In the police. Everything's on paper. It's just horrible.
So moving on about the board's work, the economist Dr. Francisco Catala makes the analogy of the crumbling foundation on a house. That's why I used the illustration. It was very, it brought it home with me. He said that the foundation of the house has not been tended to. And as you see here, the foundation is productive activity and the distribution of revenues from that productive activity. We have that the foundation is that, and in Puerto Rico, productive activity has shrunk 20% in 15 years. With the continued reduction in population, projected to be at 2.9 million in 2024, Puerto Rico will not have enough revenue to sustain operations. So we have less and less people contributing to the tax base, to our income, to our revenues. How are we going to pay for our expenses, even, you know, our operational expenses? How are we going to pay for the debt? And retirement funds are being depleted even further because there's no contributor base. The contributor base is shrinking. As you see here, that in 1980, 80% of people who contributed to that base was salaried employees. That is now 20%. 60% of Puerto Rico's gross domestic product in 1980 came from salaried employees. Today, that number is 30%. So, as you see here, as Dr. Catala says, the board tends to the branches, not the foundation of the problem. As you can see, these are elements about the board at PROMESA that make it more and more non-viable. And there's some elements in PROMESA that have not even been addressed that are quote-unquote positive elements. Things like the law itself says fiscal plans must provide a method to achieve fiscal responsibility and access to the capital markets, and among other things, identify essential services. That hasn't been done. Adequate funding for public pension systems. They're more and more trying to reduce the pensions. Debt sustainability analysis, provide for capital expenditures and investments necessary to promote economic growth. That hasn't been done. Identify and promote critical projects and name a revitalization coordinator, which quit about a year or so ago and has not been replaced. In terms of the status of La Junta's work, we have that the GAO, the General Accounting Office report in 2019 itself, acknowledges that Puerto Rico's general revenue decreased by 11%, and the capacity for debt repayment depends on the outcomes of the restructuring of the debt, but also of, it depends on generating sustained economic growth. Agreements that the La Junta has reached were based on economic growth estimates that were overly optimistic, and we are facing the possibility of having a second bankruptcy as a result of those agreements. The study cited, one of the studies cited in the GAO report is authored by Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize winner, and Martin Guzman, who's Argentina's current Minister of Economy. And as you see here, they say that Puerto Rico's debt must be reduced by 80%. That has not been the case. In one or another agreement, the adjustment of the debt has reached about 40%. So with all this not so pretty picture, what are we to do? Some of the alternative measures that we seek to implement are the auditing of the debt cancellation, and a development project, like I said, a Marshall Plan for Puerto Rico. Possibly have Congress support match on Medicaid funds, ease the restrictions on cabotage and maritime laws. And then in consultation with Marcia Rivera, a Puerto Rican economist educating heads of state in Latin America about sustainable economic growth, she stated, and I paraphrase, for 122 years, Puerto Rico has been under United States rule with no representation and no vote. As such, Puerto Rico has never been able to generate an economic development project that is sustainable, one that provides enough jobs for Puerto Ricans on the island. Puerto Rico's unemployment rate has consistently been in the double digits. Puerto Rico has the lowest labor participation rate in the world. We need to design the mechanisms that allow Puerto Rico to generate enough jobs so that Puerto Ricans can live on the island. We need proposals that enable Puerto Rico to build a new economic and social development strategy. We need tools for development. Puerto Rico not only has riches in the form of a strategic geoposition, but we also have a wealth of talent that up till now has been exported and contributes to world economies all over the world. I'm sorry, no, that's, I repeat myself. Puerto Rico has 9 kinds of soil. Puerto Rico has the capacity to be economically diverse. There are numerous local initiatives in agriculture, tourism, technology, arts, culture, small and medium businesses. Like I said earlier, Puerto Rico has a trained workforce that is bilingual. We are seeking then for Puerto Rico joint ventures in innovation, manufacturing. We're looking to build a knowledge city in the facilities where once Roosevelt Road stood. And we will submit to Congress in writing alternatives for social and economic development that are sustainable. We seek to create opportunities so that Puerto Ricans have the opportunities we deserve. And that concludes the part about Promesa. Any questions?
I do.
Uh-huh.
Thank you for being here. My name is Antonio Camacho. One of the things that you mentioned that I haven't heard from any economists is about the debt and the bond issue, meaning according to the law that gave citizenship to Puerto Rico, also created a triple tax exception on the bond, which means that if I, from Puerto Rico, buy a bond, which is the same in Alaska, Alaska is going to tax me for the capital gains that I get out of those. But if an Alaska citizen buys the one in Puerto Rico, they're tax-free. So, I mean, the discrepancy, if a bank is issuing a loan and is not getting any, not claiming any interest, the mechanisms are in place to become bankrupt. So, is there's any talk about changing that? Because there is mentioning about the debt, but that is also a root cause that could be changed.
Yeah, that would, I think there's legal precedent even from other territories that has found that the debt may be also the responsibility of the federal government. I believe in order to tend to that root problem that you mentioned, we need the change of status. Well, the framework has to change, and I think as we define our political and economic relationship with the United States moving on, that needs to be tended to.
I have a question. You mentioned that under Title V of PROMESA, there is a section that is about economic development.
Mhm.
So, as you mentioned, I know some of the former person in charge of that area, he left the Junta and he has not been replaced, which means it may not be active.
Yeah.
The others activities that the federal government is, or ideas that have been floated around, that are creating a task force to monitor not only the restructuring of the debt and economic development, but also the federal funds that are coming to the island. Some of them have been called the economic SAR, like having one person that receives.
We have a SAR now. We have someone from the White House that was just appointed.
So my question to you is, what is your take, what is your position towards those kind of other activities, not necessarily the one from PROMESA? Like, should Puerto Rico have one person or a group of people that are now managing federal funds coming to the island for the purpose of a recovery?
Whatever represents more bureaucracy, I believe, and this is my personal assessment, I believe that it's gonna cause more problems than solve problems. That being said, I also believe that, whatever projects of, in terms of economic development, we decide to, I guess, adopt as we move on, should come from Puerto Ricans themselves. I believe that we know our soil, we know the environment, we know, basically, for it to be sustainable, I think it needs to be people-owned. I mean, this might be something that comes from my roots in terms of, being an anthropologist. I believe that, community-based and people-based, initiatives fare a lot better because they serve people's needs.
I have a second question, if you don't mind. So my second question, at the last PROMESA hearing, group from Puerto Rico, some of them are candidates on races as well, came and they were having their presentation. And one question that came from a Republican congressman was, what is something that Congress is, what is a law, aside from PROMESA, that is Congress is preventing or has enacted that gives Puerto Rico a greater disadvantage over any other state?
I think that would be the Jones Act, because
But the Jones Act applies to all states and territories. It applies to.
It doesn't apply to 39.
They have an exception. You're right.
exactly, we could obtain an exemption, and I think that we would enable Puerto Rico to grow its economy, because ultimately, we don't want any, I mean, we're gonna need support in the sense of economic, financial packages, but I think more than anything, we need ways to grow by ourselves.
I just want to point out on Virgin Islands and Jones Act, it's because the U.S. Coast Guard was managing the island when the law was enacted. So therefore, they were already enforcing the same provisions that you read in the Jones Act. So that's the reason why they had the exemption.
Let me say something here. Puerto Rico is in the verge of complete collapse, period. And let me tell you why, okay? Right now, it doesn't matter who governs Puerto Rico. It has a PROMESA, a junta, who's gonna take all the actions that have to do with economics. Period. There's no way out of it. We got ourselves into this, okay, with bad government, period, okay? Governments who decided to do and act upon themselves and not for the people, okay? So now who suffers out of all this is not the government, because they go home with a good salary every day. But it is that middle class and the lower class, like my mom, okay, my sisters, okay, who are in Puerto Rico, and go through that every day. So what do we need to do? Some people, I said, listen, forget about the, the repayment. No, it's not gonna happen. We will have to repay this debt, okay, one way or the other. And it's not, the government's not gonna suffer, it's gonna be the people that's gonna suffer. So what is the best way to do it? And that, I think, is where we wanna go with this, and we talked about this and stuff like that. For example, right now, one of the biggest issues is this referendum, okay, for statehood that's gonna go during the election. It's a mockery, okay, that's what's going on, because when the United States Department of Justice does not even concur, okay, with a referendum ongoing, so where we go from this? We go from paying this debt to not even walking into trying to become a state. So this is a real travesty where we at as a country. It's a very travesty that we are who represents us. So the evolution of everything that's been said today, it is how do we fix this that the government doesn't take advantage of, that the people of Puerto Rico takes advantage of. That's the real dilemma as we go through all of this. I've seen it, I lived it, okay? There's a lot of poor people in Puerto Rico, okay? So I think this discussion is broader than today, but that's reality.
If I may abound, on root causes, I believe that it's multi-factors, not only the governments in the past. I think that the status has to do with it, there are other factors that I may not have in mind right now. About the repayment of the debt, again, I think that we need first than anything to audit the debt, to find what is the legal debt. Illegal debt needs to be canceled, and then we can restructure in a legal way.
Yeah. I want you to pay the debt, and I'm paying the guy who's managing this $64 million a year so they can manage my debt.
Exactly.
Does that make any sense?
That doesn't make any sense.
Hi, Peter Summer with BBN Puerto Rico. We're a financial news service. So one of the things about Puerto Rico, and we find it really the best story in America, is you're getting a huge amount of foreign investment in Puerto Rico, especially from European companies. We're seeing great investments from hedge funds from New York moving to Puerto Rico because they're beating out for it. Because Puerto Rico is unquestionably the best town in America. Lawyers, doctors, businessmen. So people are saying, it wasn't Hurricane Maria, it was Hurricane Prepa. It was a bad infrastructure due to corporate government corruption. And the worst word in Spanish is gobierno. So my question is, how will you get people like Duke Energy's doing Prepa, looking at property, then you're the first one and you paved the path to privatization with the San Juan airports and the highways. So your business story is what makes Puerto Rico succeed. So how are you going to be able to take control of your own thing and go to Jamie Dimon and the head of JP Morgan and the big money in America and get rid of all the, close down your government, because those people who've been working in Puerto Rican government, and you did it yourself, you exercise your First Amendment rights and keep up the government. Thank you as an American. You exercise your rights. So, this is what people want. They want pro-business, get the job done, leadership,
Yeah, and we talked about measures to make it easier for businesses to start and operate in Puerto Rico. That's one of the things that we can do about that. In terms of people, investors, and for instance, what I would call the digital millionaires coming into Puerto Rico, we have a law.
John Paulson's doing a wonderful job already. Yeah.
But we have a law that doesn't require for them to invest on Puerto Rico's growth and in Puerto Rico's economic development. I feel like the exemptions that they take benefits from or take advantage of do little service for Puerto Rico's economic development.
But shutting down your government, firing state workers, that's an initial. And then most of the problem with Puerto Rico, because of the Clinton change in the tax law, we didn't have that. They overhired public workers, they created this debt, and it was all good because of the lottery tax. So people want to see the state workers fired as much as possible. Minimal government. Switzerland's a wealthy country, they have minimal
Puerto
bureaucracy.
Rico's public employees, the number of Puerto Rico public employees, it's about the same as the 10 similar states in the United States. So the number of
300 something, almost 300,000, right?
How much?
About 300,000, close.
300,000 employees.
So hold on. Your numbers are wrong. First of all, as a matter of size of the government and head count, the government of Puerto Rico's head count would be per capita the same as Wyoming. No one is saying that Wyoming's government is
It's too big,
oversized for the kind of sector that it provides. Actually, Puerto Rico's government in some ways is too small,
Yeah.
given the financial need. Now, regarding the tax incentives that you mentioned, there's a report that actually just came out right now through the oversight board. Actually, if you look at the disclosure statement, if I don't recall the exact number, they talked about how many Act 122 people came through. And of those, they said, look, about 4,000, if I recall, who came through. It's created 12,000 jobs. That means you've had, for every millionaire who comes through, you've created 4 jobs. The return on that is pretty unimpressive.
I'm seeing real forensic evidence on the ground because reporters who get the evidence first. You're seeing huge amount of increase in workers in medical care because Puerto Rico has a huge part in the U.S. medical industry. All those factors Smith has declined. And my Europeans love Puerto Rico because only America and North Korea taxes global income, so their European only get taxed at 5% rather than getting taxed forever at the U.S. rate. So you're getting all this interest. Also, one of the few facts that people don't realize in Puerto Rico is half the population qualifies for EU citizenship because of the Spanish, whatever, you have a relative in Spain.
That's not gonna happen.
No, but for a foreign, for a foreign company, they want talent, they want workforce, and they want the ability to do business. And all this works together. I'm seeing it from investors. Look, see, the people who
Let
pay
me tell
salaries.
you, you may have seen
Yeah.
a reality that is what you're around, the reality or the reality of whatever the paper, we can write whatever on the paper. The reality that I see in Puerto Rico, in the Puerto Rico that I live day by day,
Yeah.
is not that. I mean, in the Puerto Rico that I visited 2 days after the earthquakes, it's not that. There's no richness for those people. There's no, the only way for them is the way out. Move to the United States.
No, but I'm
Because
saying-
there's no jobs, there wasn't even government attention at that point.
Yeah.
So,
But the data doesn't show that.
It does show what I'm seeing there. That's what
I
I'm
am
hearing.
too. I mean, look, if you're talking
Go to the
about.
Vanderbilt Hotel, see the foreign investors, see the
Right,
people
but
opening.
then look at the
Yeah.
reports on the Act 2022 and the jobs that they're creating.
Well-
The numbers,
Yeah.
you're looking at an outlier and saying because of that outlier, that's the norm. But the problem is that isn't the norm. If the numbers line up,
Yeah.
then I'd say sure.
Sorry, Puerto Rico used to have every global CEO, US CEO, and global CEO. doing business.
Absolutely, everybody wanted to go and make some freaking money in
Yeah.
Puerto Rico, and they did it, and that's why we're in the trouble. When there's 78 municipalities in Puerto Rico, you know this.
Yeah.
Okay, you tell me how many of those 78 municipalities are wealthy and are taken care of by these wealthy millionaires?
there's more than 30 that are about to go
I know.
back.
I mean,
Come on.
Puerto Rico is the highest.
There's
You
a
got- you-
gentleman here, I'm sorry, so I want to get.
This is a very interesting conversation, but since we're at a congressional briefing, I'm curious what the federal policy prescriptions to some of these issues might be.
Federal policy prescription, and what's that?
What can Congress do?
What can Congress do?
I'm less interested in hearing what the best business strategy is, and more interested in
One of
hearing
the
what
things that
Congress
Congress could do is create an economic development package for Puerto Rico. One other thing that Congress could do is express itself about our right to self-determination and the ability for Puerto Rico to have the constitutional assembly that I'm going to talk about in a minute, which is a great segue into that. Any other questions?
I have a quick question. So, from my understanding from what you said, you're not for PROMESA and the board, but you do understand that there should be some sort of like restructuring of what's going on.
Yeah.
That eventually should come by legislation of Congress.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
I totally agree, and I have stated that, again, we need to audit the debt to ensure that we are addressing and restructuring a debt that is legal, not illegal debt. After we do that, then we can restructure the debt and have some sort of a project that Congress passes, a law that Congress passes where economic development takes a larger role than it has right now.
Thank you.
So we're talking, we don't have to be experts on economics to know that the debt should be audited and it's like common sense. So do you think that Congress can do something about that, start that initiative like right now or in posterior future? Can we do something in Congress to just audit the debt, like see what we find out about how illegal could it be, and in that case, just cancel it. Is there something that Congress can do right
Definitely,
now?
Congress could call for an investigation on the debt. La Junta, the board produced report, a quote-unquote audit, which was not as in-depth and did not really went through forensic process. So that's what we need. We need to identify the roots of this accumulation of debt and determine who's even legally responsible, who's liable for this debt, this creation of a debt.
Yes, if I may, one of the things that actually the diaspora is actually promoting heavily along with others in Puerto Rico, and we're probably familiar with this, is the bill introduced in the Senate by Elizabeth Warren and in the House by Congresswoman Velasquez and several other members, which is the Territorial Relief Act. We believe that that is something that the staffers will be interested in learning more about, because that is something that most organizations out there, where it's Vamos for Puerto Rico, that I'm the executive director of, or the Power for Puerto Rico, and many of the other coalitions out there working on this issue have been promoting consistently. There are some other things that are in the works that they have not been officially introduced, so I'm not going to get into that. But the one thing that actually we deeply care about right now as the diaspora is in order to continue helping Puerto Rico, is actually those bills, and there's a companion bill, basically carbon copies one of another.
Debt relief.
Is the Territorial Relief Act. It's actually, let me give you the numbers for the benefit of the staffers. In the Senate, it's 3262. In the House, it's 2526. Those are the bills that are already introduced. Once again, there are other things that are in the works, but right now, that's a piece of legislation that most of the organizations in the diaspora have been advocating strongly for, and it will address the debt.
I'm sorry,
It's
House.
3262 in the Senate, and it's 2526 in the House. Basically, in the Senate, it was introduced by Elizabeth Warren, Senator Sanders. There are like 6 senators who did it together. In the House, it's a big of a larger number, with Congresswoman Velasquez, Alexandra
Is that the
Ocasio-Cortez.
$4.7 billion package that the Senate said it wouldn't pass, that Congressman?
No, this bill is specific to address the austerity measures and the Financial Oversight Management Board, among other things related to Puerto Rico. And once again, there are other things that are in the works, but the bill that is right now, when you look to congress.gov and want to see a piece of legislation, that's what we have in the books right now.
Have there been any public hearings on that?
In the House, yes. And in fact, there has been hearings already. The chairman of House Natural Resources conducted hearings last year. Actually, Alvin, who's in front of me, was one of the witnesses.
Is there any Republican support for any of those projects?
Right now, those bills do not have a Republican on the bill, but there have been conversations. As you know, sometimes bills can become attached to other pieces of legislation. So a lot of these things are in the works, but we are trying to make sure that when we're, at least as an organization, and I can speak on behalf of my organization, Vamos for Puerto Rico, we're promoting those bills heavily, because we see it as conduits for people to express their opinions and concerns regarding what is happening right now.
As a way for accountability in terms of, as Puerto Rican constituents in the United States, we have the power to express through our vote what we believe the agenda should be in Congress, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is that some of what you bring to the table when you try to push for this?
Yeah, absolutely. Accountability is incredibly important. One of the things that we're trying to do in our case is make sure that we amplify voices like yours, because you come from Puerto Rico. Vamos is not in the business of telling the people of Puerto Rico what to do or what to advocate for. Vamos is in the business of amplifying what people in Puerto Rico want, because we're members of the diaspora, we're organizations that are part of the Puerto Rican diaspora, but we make sure that 5 million Puerto Ricans here have a voice. And so far, what we have found consistently and repeatedly, whether it's us and other coalitions that are working on this issue, is that that bill has language that people actually identify with, because they want accountability for the decisions of the Financial Oversight Management Board.
Mm-hmm.
People are appalled by the fact that they're spending millions of dollars that come out of taxpayers in Puerto Rico, not federal taxpayers.
Which is only 41%.
Yeah, and so this is one of the many concerns, but I wanted, because there are Hill staffers here, and I'm a former Hill staffer myself. I know that when they ask questions about what is already out there, so they know. And of course, you're providing some of that background in terms of what is happening in Puerto Rico. I look forward to hearing you're connecting, making the connection to the Constitutional Assembly. But I just wanted to make sure that people know that in terms of the diaspora, we're advocating heavily for this particular thing.
Thank you very much for letting me know about that. I will have
Yeah, we can talk
a meeting
offline.
later that I would like to bring that up, so don't go
Awesome.
after.
Sure.
Can I say one thing? Real quick for the staff, I'm respecting the doctor's time. You can give me an answer after it's done, but with respect to the piece of legislation he just mentioned, is there going to be any opportunities for the public to provide an input on any of those pieces of legislation they're trying to move through the floor or to the Senate? You know, like when they went to Puerto
Probably
Rico?
have to check and get
Yeah.
back with you.
Okay,
Right?
all right.
Okay, so as Mr. Gloria said, there's a few different causes, or I'm misquoting you, but there's a few different causes for what's going on, and one of the things that we need to address in Puerto Rico is the basis of it all. It's the status. As history passes us by and we still don't have a definition of status, we're still a colony where we don't have the ability to take decisions about our future. So one of the ways to do that, the way that we have proposed, and these are the sources for the material on economic, on the PROMESA. The way that we have proposed for us to do that is the Constitutional Assembly. And what does that entail? The Constitutional Assembly is a mechanism organized, consisting of various steps. It is a mechanism consisting of various steps. There's basically 4 steps, and there's different versions about the assembly. We are letting ourselves be guided by what they call the Colegio de Abogados version. Puerto Rico voters first authorized through a general vote to call on an election to elect delegates. So the first step, Puerto Rico votes on electing delegates. The delegates will represent political status decolonizing alternatives, namely stateside independence and a social republic. The number of delegates by option who would nominate those delegates, and if they would be selected by accumulation or by district, all of these are issues that will be discussed and approved by the legislature in the law to enable the delegate selection. Then the second step would be a general vote to elect those delegates, and the delegates represent decolonizing alternatives. They will constitute the assembly, and then they deliberate from a previously determined amount of time about the content of the options. So the second step is a general vote to elect the delegates, and then the assembly is constituted. They start deliberating about the content of each of those options. While this happens, while the assembly deliberates, Puerto Rico's executive and legislature keep working as usual. Then the third step is the Constitutional Assembly interacts with the United States executive and legislature to negotiate the options, the status options, what the United States is willing to consider under what terms, what conditions. And then finally, once the assembly concludes negotiations, and we have that commitment from the United States to adopt whatever is chosen by the people of Puerto Rico, the status options are presented for a general vote, and no status change would happen without the consent of Puerto Rico voters, and that is very important. The Status Constitutional Assembly is the mechanism with the most participation by Puerto Rico voters in the decolonization process. Puerto Rican voters will vote at least 3 times. The first time to authorize to call the assembly, the second time to elect the delegates, and the third time to vote on the status option. And that is why I firmly believe that that is the way for Puerto Rico to solve the status question as we move forward, and the status question which is intimately linked with our economic development and our financial crisis that we're having right now. With that, I conclude my presentation. If there are any other questions, I think still we have a few minutes, like about 15 minutes, 14, 13. Or statements that you'd like to make?
on the third step where the delegates go to Congress and that negotiation comes into play.
Not only Congress, but from the way that the latest, the most recent public law requires that the Department of Justice approves whatever happens in Puerto Rico, so we're projecting that possibly the executive is gonna be involved in the negotiations as well.
As the committee of this proposal has it identified what are the things or elements that are negotiable and non-negotiable, meaning, let's say, the delegates or the delegates decide to something, but then Congress, which ultimately has the power because the Constitution of Puerto Rico gives them that power because the law that created the government in Puerto Rico gives them that power because the U.S. Constitution gives them that power. What is negotiable in regards of what is Congress willing to consider, but what is the Puerto Rican people willing to consider?
I believe that each group of delegates is going to determine what is negotiable for each of the status functions. I wouldn't dare to define what is that right now.
It was defined, I think President Obama task force back in 2011 came out and defined the status, or actually the options, I should say.
Yeah, the options are defined. The
right.
Estadio Libre Asociado is
Exactly.
not
That-
viable.
You know, I think it's Libre Asociación,
Yeah.
Independentista y Estadidad. I think those are the
Yeah,
three.
but those are the names, the contents
Right.
of the definition is yet to be
Exactly.
determined, and that would be determined by the delegates. Along with, they would negotiate with Congress what's Congress willing to do.
Because what the United States Department of Justice just does, it is, they receive the information from the Puerto Rican government, and it says, yes, this is lawful, and
Acceptable
we're
language.
going to accept this, and we're going to support your referendum. Right now, that is so far, because right now, the United States Department of Justice wouldn't even agree to look at it. It is that bad.
No, I get it. You mentioned a great point. Just because either the DOJ and Congress has the authority to identify what is lawful, but what I think that we have to consider is just because it's legal, that doesn't mean it's right. In regards to slavery, it was legal, but was it right?
So I think from the legal approach, based on my lecture, what Justice Department has been trying to, sort out is because local political parties in Puerto Rico formulate these questions, going into referendums. And it's not about representing the different ideologies, but it's the legalese, what is embedded in that language that makes the DOJ uncomfortable.
I do have a question. So, the DOJ belongs to the executive branch. So we're right now in the legislative branch. Does Congress need to approve the creation of a constitutional assembly?
I don't believe so, but it would be a great exercise in democracy for Congress to acknowledge and promote the creation of the assembly.
So in other words, Puerto Rico can create its own constitutional assembly, can do everything and even run a plebiscite, and then after that, they can, in theory, go to DOJ and say, can you please acknowledge that this will be a
You don't want to do it like that. You want to go to US DOJ and says, listen, this is what we're thinking to do, okay? And have that conversation, and then all the legal masters of the life go and say, yeah, that it is. So when Puerto Rico doesn't run
That's a
it,
fair argument, but what are we asking of Congress in terms of constitutional assembly? What is the action?
I would like to see a declaration of Congress moving forward that acknowledges and promotes the process of the Constitutional Assembly, and it's already being done. There is a project that wasn't passed, of course, but that it does talk about the Constitutional Assembly. I think it uses another term.
I think
the legislation for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They can pass constitution, as long as your constitution doesn't conflict with the US Constitution.
So it has to be approved by Congress. As soon as it doesn't
Oh,
do any
now-
alteration to the Republican form of government,
Yep.
then Congress will look
But
at
you
it.
can make any change in
Well-
Puerto Rico as long as it doesn't conflict with the US Constitution.
Because the path,
Oh, it has to be approved.
because
Exactly. There is a clause in the Puerto Rico's
Rico
constitution.
decide what they wanna do, conversation with UNIS, DOJ,
Yeah.
that conversation happened, it takes effect, that is taken to Congress, Congress says, okay, Senate says, okay, they do a joint motion, that joint motion goes to the President of the United States, the President of the United States says, yes.
So in other words, the first step is for the House, for the legislation
Let's go back
to
to
support that constitutional amendment.
That is not required, but it would be nice to have.
Of course.
With that,